Unshakable joy. How to build your sanctuary within. Life will challenge you in ways you could never anticipate. There are times when setbacks accumulate simultaneously. Your arrangements collapse, people betray your trust, your heart grows weary, and your own mind turns into your fiercest adversary. You begin to question why true contentment feels so completely out of reach. However, Buddhism reveals a profound truth that most individuals overlook. Satisfaction is not a destination you wait for, search for, or pursue. It is an internal state you construct within yourself, precisely when external circumstances cause the most distress. Through these teachings, you will explore the core principles that empower you to preserve a constructive and joyful mindset even during your darkest periods. When your spirit is exhausted, your thoughts are heavy, and your world feels completely upended. Once you integrate these insights, external events will lose their power to disrupt your internal tranquility. 1. You don't need a perfect life to feel peace, only a present mind. A vast majority of people waste their entire existence chasing a flawless version of reality that simply does not exist. They convince themselves that serenity will arrive at some later date once they secure the ideal career, discover the perfect companion, accumulate more wealth, eliminate all obstacles, or when their thoughts finally align with their desires. This fixed mindset traps them in a cycle of endless dissatisfaction because they constantly delay their inner peace for an imaginary future. Buddhism demonstrates that genuine suffering does not arise from a lack of perfection in your surroundings. It stems entirely from a lack of presence. Unhappiness takes root whenever your attention refuses to remain where your actual life is unfolding. When your focus drifts to the past, it constantly uncovers regrets, historical errors, and memories that are unchangeable. This habitual drift breeds deep sorrow and internal guilt. Conversely, when your thoughts sprint toward the future, they construct worst-case scenarios, manufactured anxieties, and endless uncertainties about events that may never occur. The more your attention wanders away from the current moment, the more chaotic and heavy your emotional landscape becomes. This explains why even individuals who possess every material luxury can still experience a profound internal emptiness. Their awareness is simply never anchored in the now. True contentment cannot exist in yesterday because the past has already vanished. It cannot reside in tomorrow because the future has not yet materialized. Tranquility exists exclusively in the present, for it is the only dimension where reality actually takes place. When you train your mind to settle precisely where your body rests fully engaged in this specific breath, this immediate sensation, this exact second your perceived problems stop multiplying. You begin to recognize that in this explicit moment you are secure. You have successfully navigated every single hardship in your history, and you possess the exact resilience required to manage this moment as well. Remaining anchored in the present does not imply that your life has suddenly become flawless, or that your challenges have miraculously dissolved. It simply means you refuse to magnify those challenges by endlessly replaying them or projecting catastrophic outcomes. By gently steering your awareness back to the immediate reality, your breathing, your physical senses, your direct environment, your inner anxieties lose their grip, and your worries become powerless. You do not require absolute control over every external variable to feel centered. You do not need to resolve every past flaw to experience happiness. You do not need to hit every milestone to maintain a constructive outlook. What you fundamentally require is the discipline to return your mind to the present moment repeatedly, especially when intrusive thoughts attempt to pull you away. The more you cultivate this habit, the quieter and more composed your internal world becomes, even during highly stressful periods. On days when everything feels overwhelming, returning to the immediate present carves out a sanctuary of clarity where you can breathe, reorient your thinking, and regain your footing. The reality is remarkably uncomplicated. Contentment flourishes through full awareness, not through flawless conditions. The very instant you master the art of bringing your focus back to the current moment, the internal chaos begins to subside, and reality feels significantly lighter, even if your external situation remains completely unchanged. 2. Stop carrying what isn't yours. Release the emotional weight. A primary reason so many individuals surrender their internal joy is their tendency to shoulder emotional burdens that do not belong to them. A significant portion of the daily anxiety you experience does not originate from your own journey. It is absorbed from the rigid expectations, critical opinions, and unresolved psychological baggage of the people around you. You continue to carry cutting remarks aimed at you years ago. You lug around the harsh judgments of peers, the unfulfilled expectations of family members, the relentless pressures of societal standards, and the wrongdoings of those who mistreated you. You are holding on to emotional states that were never yours to manage. And over time, this immense psychological load leaves you exhausted, disoriented, and estranged from your authentic self. Buddhism clarifies that deep dissatisfaction takes root the moment you link your internal stability to factors entirely beyond your personal control. When you permit someone else's evaluation to dictate your self-worth, you subject yourself to suffering. When you allow another person's volatile behavior to govern your daily mood, you surrender your peace. When you subordinate your life choices to the expectations of others, you forfeit your autonomy. Genuine contentment becomes mathematically impossible when your heart is continuously cluttered with the emotional noise exported by others. Many people fail to realize that their melancholy, fear, and deep-seated insecurities are frequently borrowed from external sources. You were not born with innate self-doubt. The external environment conditioned you to feel that way. You were not born with a sense of inadequacy. Someone else planted that belief in your mind. You were not born inherently stressed. You gradually absorbed that tension from your immediate circles. Without consciously identifying it, you are navigating your days weighed down by an emotional cargo you were never meant to transport. It is impossible to experience a sense of lightness while deliberately holding on to thoughts that exhaust your spirit. You cannot harbor a positive outlook while actively clinging to negativity that was projected onto you. Internal growth accelerates the moment you make a definitive choice to discard the psychological weight you never needed to accept. This transformation demands that you abandon other people's blueprints for your life and replace them with your own fundamental truth. It requires you to forfeit the exhausting desire to please everyone and prioritize your own mental peace instead. It hinges on the crucial realization that you are not under any obligation to repair anyone else's emotional state, rescue them from the consequences of their personal choices, or process their unhealed trauma. Setting down this borrowed weight is not a sign of cold avoidance. It is a profound reclamation of your personal boundaries, identity, and energy. It is about establishing a crystal-clear distinction between your actual responsibilities and the burdens belonging to others. When you finally release that unauthorized psychological cargo, you will instantly notice a shift in your breathing. It becomes deeper, clearer, and far more grounded. You will discover that your joy was never truly lost. It was merely obscured by a mountain of expectations that belonged to someone else. The moment you clear that clutter, you create the internal space necessary for peace to rebuild naturally and effortlessly. 3. Acceptance is not weakness. It is the beginning of inner freedom. The concept of acceptance is frequently misunderstood by modern society. People mistakenly equate it with passive resignation, defeat, or an uninspired surrender to an unfavorable destiny. Buddhism, however, offers a completely inverted paradigm. Acceptance is not a confession of weakness. It is the ultimate catalyst for inner liberation. A vast percentage of human suffering is generated not by reality itself, but by our active psychological resistance to reality. You expend massive energy fighting unalterable history, suppressing genuine emotions, and waging war against variables you cannot influence, mistakenly believing that struggling harder will rewrite the past or bend the future to your will. This relentless resistance completely hollows out your energy reserves, escalates your neurological stress, and robs you of clarity. To accept a situation does not mean you endorse bad behavior, validate injustice, or pretend that a painful experience was pleasant. Acceptance simply means you exit the exhausting, unwinnable argument with reality. You stop burning through your finite lifespan, wishing that what has already occurred could somehow be unoccurred. When you accept the facts of a situation, you instantly neutralize its emotional leverage over your mind. effectively reclaiming the personal power you had previously surrendered to external events. Consider the immense psychological torment born from denying the truth. People refuse to accept that a meaningful relationship has reached its natural conclusion, so they prolong their agony. They refuse to accept that someone let them down, so they mentally replay the betrayal indefinitely. They resist structural changes in their lives, leaving them entirely paralyzed in the past. This psychological resistance resembles an exhausting attempt to swim directly against a violent river current. No matter how much raw effort you exert, the natural flow of reality will always overpower you. Acceptance is the conscious decision to stop fighting the current, so you can finally conserve your energy and learn to float. When you intentionally evaluate reality exactly as it is, rather than how your ego wishes it were, an immediate shift occurs. Your internal dialogue quietens. You stop piling unnecessary layers of psychological suffering on top of clean, unavoidable pain. You stop inventing elaborate narratives, projections, and fears around the raw experience. You meet life exactly where it stands, and from that objective, clear-headed position, you can finally execute intelligent, constructive, and tranquil decisions. True transformation can only begin once you stop denying your current location. When you accept your exact circumstances, your genuine options become vividly apparent. You quickly discern between variables within your direct control and those entirely outside of it, allowing you to cease wasting energy on dead ends and start investing it into tangible possibilities. Acceptance is never the termination of your personal evolution. It is the exact baseline where genuine recovery and healing take hold. Those who view acceptance as a flaw spend their lives fighting unwinnable battles against time and the very nature of existence. But those who integrate acceptance become psychologically bulletproof. They do not shatter during crises because they adapt to the terrain of life rather than cursing it. 4. Your thoughts shape your reality. Choose them with awareness. One of the most foundational principles of Buddhist philosophy is the understanding that your internal narrative actively manufactures your experience of the world. Your reality is not dictated by raw external circumstances, systemic variables, or the actions of others. It is fundamentally constructed by the continuous stream of thoughts passing through your consciousness. Two individuals can be subjected to the identical adverse event, yet experience entirely divergent internal realities. The variance does not lie within the external occurrence itself, but entirely within the specific meaning and narrative their minds assign to that occurrence. This explains why some people collapse under minor inconveniences, while others maintain an unshakable composure during catastrophic storms. Most individuals remain entirely oblivious to the absolute authority their thoughts exercise over their baseline happiness. A solitary negative thought, when rehearsed continuously within your mind, eventually hardens into a core belief. A core belief, when sustained over a long enough timeline, solidifies into your permanent identity. Once a concept integrates into your identity, it dictates your entire reality. This is the exact mechanism through which people inadvertently engineer their own psychological torment. They blindly validate every anxious narrative, dark projection, and self-critical whisper their brain produces, treating fleeting mental static as absolute, undeniable truth. Buddhism offers a liberating alternative. You are not the thoughts passing through your mind. You are the vast, silent awareness observing those thoughts. You are the conscious witness of the mental traffic, not the traffic itself. The moment you internalize this distinction, your relationship with your emotions alters completely. Instead of being violently dragged around by every passing feeling, you learn to observe them objectively. Instead of allowing involuntary thoughts to dictate your daily mood, you assume the authority to decide which mental premises deserve your focused attention and which ones should be allowed to dissolve. You begin to interrogate your own mind, asking, is this specific narrative factually accurate? Is it serving my growth? Does it elevate my mental state or degrade it? A thought left to itself is merely a passing sentence inside your head. It possesses no inherent reality. However, when you unconsciously feed a destructive thought with your attention, fear, and visceral emotional reactions, you grant it artificial power. It grows louder, assumes more mass, and eventually becomes an automated mental reflex that distorts how you view your capabilities, your relationships, and your potential. Reclaiming your happiness requires breaking this automated cycle. Choosing your thoughts with awareness does not mean plastering fake, superficial positivity over genuine pain. It simply means refusing to continuously water the mental weeds that actively poison your well-being. When an internal narrative tells you that you are fundamentally inadequate, you do not engage in an exhausting argument with it, you simply watch it float by. When your mind insists that everything will inevitably collapse, you don't succumb to panic, you recognize that thought as raw fear masquerading as a factual prediction. Your mind functions exactly like a garden. Left neglected, wild weeds will dominate the landscape. But with consistent, mindful cultivation, you can intentionally grow clarity, emotional resilience, and authentic confidence. 5. Your emotional energy is your inner climate. Protect it before you protect anything else. Every single day, you inhabit a distinct internal climate that you are actively constructing, often without a shred of conscious awareness. On certain days, your internal weather is warm, expansive, and resilient. On other days, it feels dark, claustrophobic, and highly volatile. Most people operate under the false assumption that this inner weather is completely dictated by the external environment, by frustrating people, difficult financial situations, unexpected delays, or societal crises. Buddhism corrects this misconception, demonstrating that your emotional energy is a precious resource that you possess the absolute right and power to safeguard, manage, and deliberately preserve. Your psychological energy is not a superficial byproduct of your mood. It directly dictates how you synthesize information, how you speak to your loved ones, how you respond to pressure, and how you evaluate your worth. When your core energy is depleted, the simplest tasks feel monumental. Minor criticisms sting intensely, and negative thoughts sound amplified and impossible to ignore. Conversely, when your inner climate is actively protected and serene, the complexities of life become completely manageable. Looming challenges look significantly smaller, intense emotions feel non-threatening, and your default reaction shifts from panicked impulse to measured patience. Therefore, guarding your emotional reserve is an absolute necessity for survival. Regrettably, most individuals routinely give their emotional currency away to anyone who demands it. They allow manipulative personalities to drain them out of a fear of causing disappointment. They willingly absorb the toxic venting of toxic circles because they believe walking away is impolite. They compromise their boundaries and say yes to obligations that cause internal resentment simply to avoid social friction. They misinterpret continuous self-sacrifice as loyalty, staying anchored in environments and relationships that systematically poison their clarity. Over time, their psychological energy reserves empty out entirely, leaving them completely unequipped to handle basic life challenges. True wisdom recognizes that protecting your inner state is the highest form of self-preservation, not selfishness. It is a mathematical impossibility to pour anything meaningful from a completely empty vessel. You cannot provide strength, clarity, or authentic support to the people you love if you are internally bankrupt. Protecting your energy requires developing an acute awareness of which connections actively feed your spirit and which ones systematically siphon off your peace. It means coming to terms with the reality that not every provocative statement requires your commentary, not every slight warrants your attention, and not every external demand is entitled to your time. Your internal climate stabilizes the moment you establish non-negotiable daily habits to insulate your mind. This could involve prioritizing 10 minutes of complete silence before engaging with digital devices, choosing to completely disengage from arguments with individuals who are deeply invested in misunderstanding you, or physically removing yourself from spaces that treat your peace of mind as an afterthought. It means intentionally curating your informational diet, breathing deeply before executing a reaction, and fiercely defending the sanctity of your heart. You stop letting temporary external factors wield permanent authority over your internal world, and your life aligns with your truest self. 6. Happiness is not something you chase. It is something you create by letting go of inner resistance. One of the most exhaustive illusions embedded in culture is the idea that contentment is an elusive prize you must track down, capture, or earn through relentless effort. People spend decades pursuing milestones under the assumption that happiness is an external target, moving through life like a person chasing their own shadow, always able to see it, yet never quite able to grasp it. The more aggressively they pursue it, the further it seems to recede into the distance. Buddhism dismantles this exhausting chase by revealing a beautifully inverted truth. Satisfaction is not a commodity located outside of yourself. It doesn't materialize only when your life becomes completely devoid of problems. Contentment is the natural state that automatically emerges the moment your mind ceases its structural resistance to reality. This internal friction is the silent poison that systematically erodes your daily peace. It is the underlying critical commentary running in your mind that insists, "My life should look vastly different by now. I am forbidden from feeling this specific emotion," or "the universe must conform precisely to my immediate expectations." This rigid resistance instantly transforms standard human challenges into agonizing suffering by initiating an internal war against the current facts of your life. The truth is, you are rarely tormented by the raw pain of an experience. You are tormented by your frantic attempts to deny it, outrun it, or wipe it from reality. Letting go of this internal friction does not mean abandoning your goals or adopting an attitude of fatalistic apathy. It simply means allowing life to unfold without requiring every single detail to pass through your ego's strict filtering system. It means developing a structural understanding that human emotional states naturally fluctuate. Circumstances rise and fall in cycles, and absolutely nothing in the material universe remains static forever. Not intense joy, not deep sorrow, not sweeping success, and not discouraging failure. When you consciously stop fighting the natural movement of existence, you create a spacious internal landscape where clarity can settle and joy can flourish without effort. We are deeply conditioned to believe we require a long list of prerequisites to justify being at peace. But true spiritual maturity requires only one: a mind that has stopped fighting the current moment. If you analyze your daily stress objectively, you will discover that it rarely originates from what is occurring right now. It is almost always generated by your mental commentary about what is occurring, your frantic anxieties about tomorrow, or your grief over yesterday. The exact present moment is almost always entirely manageable. It is the elaborate weight of your resistance that feels unbearable. Contentment becomes your default reality the instant you stop demanding that every single passing emotion be pleasant, predictable, or permanent. 7. Gratitude is the most powerful path to happiness, not because life is perfect, but because your perspective becomes wiser. While gratitude is a word frequently tossed around lightly, it represents one of the most transformative psychological mechanisms available to the human mind. Most people fundamentally misunderstand its application, assuming that gratitude is merely a polite reaction reserved for periods when everything aligns flawlessly, when goals are achieved, health is optimal, finances are abundant, and everyone treats us with absolute kindness. Buddhism, however, teaches that authentic gratitude is not a passive response to a flawless existence. It is the active, deliberate capacity to perceive beauty, meaning, and profound opportunity even within a highly fractured, imperfect reality. Gratitude does not require you to deny the existence of genuine suffering, minimize real pain, or perform toxic, manufactured positivity. Rather, it is the deliberate discipline of shifting your cognitive focus away from what is systematically missing toward what is actively present, away from what is painful toward what is instructive, away from what is uncertain toward what remains fully possible. Human beings suffer immensely not because their lives are devoid of good things, but because the human brain is naturally wired to obsess over what is wrong. Left unmanaged, your mind will habitually amplify problems, hyper-focus on personal flaws, obsess over old insults, and compare your raw behind-the-scenes reality with everyone else's curated highlight reel. When your consciousness falls into this default evolutionary trap, you become entirely blind to the immense ecosystem of support, resilience, and daily beauty that is actively sustaining you. Gratitude is the gradual, gentle process of dissolving this psychological blindness, until you can finally evaluate your life through an objective lens, viewing it not as a dynamic collection of deficiencies, but as an extraordinary, evolving landscape rich with lessons, strength, internal growth, and subtle daily wonders that you previously ignored. It completely alters your neurological baseline without requiring a single modification to your actual external circumstances. Your external challenges may remain exactly as they were, but your internal capacity to navigate them expands exponentially. It doesn't instantly erase clean human pain, but it constructs an expansive perimeter of awareness around that pain, ensuring you retain the room necessary to breathe, analyze, and process the experience with dignity. Through consistent practice, you train your mind to stop defaulting to automated fear and start anchoring itself in conscious awareness. Furthermore, authentic gratitude serves as the ultimate neurological shield against the poison of comparison. In a hyper-connected world, we are constantly pressured to evaluate our personal worth by measuring our lives against our peers. This toxic habit systematically strangulates our joy before it even has an opportunity to mature. Gratitude completely breaks this spell by drawing your attention entirely back to your own soil, reminding you that your timeline is deeply personal. Your path is entirely unique, and your value cannot be calculated using someone else's metrics. It softens the heart when life hurts, serving as a medicine that gently reopens your awareness to remind you that pain is never the entire story. There are always subtle currents of kindness, endurance, and quiet progress available to you if you choose to look. 8. Inner peace comes from detachment, not from possession, control, or constant expectation. A cornerstone of psychological liberation is the realization that human suffering does not stem from the inherent cruelty of life, but from the mind's relentless habit of clinging to everything it encounters. We aggressively attach our peace of mind to specific people, precise material outcomes, rigid habits, constructed identities, unyielding expectations, and nostalgic memories. The exact moment you attach your well-being to an external variable, you render your internal stability entirely dependent on an ecosystem you can never fully control. This clinging creates an invisible chain that tethers your baseline happiness to phenomena that are fundamentally fragile, inherently temporary, and in a state of constant flux. Detachment is not an invitation to live a cold, disconnected life devoid of deep affection or ambition. It is the sophisticated art of loving deeply, working passionately, and experiencing reality intensely without completely losing your identity, in the process refusing to grip variables so tightly that their inevitable modification destroys your core stability. Torment begins the absolute second your ego demands absolute permanence in a universe where the only constant is impermanence. We demand that relationships remain perfectly static, that people never evolve, that emotions remain permanently euphoric, and that scenarios unfold precisely according to our mental blueprints. But reality does not bow to our demands. Everything in existence flows, evolves, and dissolves. When you fight this cosmic architecture, you create acute pain. When you accept it, you secure absolute peace. True detachment means enjoying the beauty of a moment or the warmth of a connection wholeheartedly, while maintaining a clear structural understanding that nothing in the physical world is truly yours to keep. Not your achievements, not your material possessions, not your status, and not even your passing thoughts. Everything you interact with is essentially borrowed from the universe, passing through your life for a designated season to teach you something profound. This realization is not bleak or depressing. It is intensely liberating. When you stop trying to possess reality, you instantly eliminate the fear of loss. When you stop demanding specific outcomes, you eliminate the possibility of disappointment. Think of detachment as interacting with life with completely open palms rather than tightly clenched fists. With open palms, you can fully appreciate and enjoy whatever experiences arrive, without desperately trying to trap them or alter their nature. You can allow people and circumstances to exit your life when their season concludes, without allowing their departure to compromise your core identity. True love flourishes exclusively in this atmosphere of freedom. Attachment, by contrast, breeds anxiety, jealousy, paranoia, and a desperate need to control. When you master detachment, your internal world becomes beautifully self-sustaining. anchored entirely within your own consciousness, rather than suspended precariously on the volatile movements of the external world. 9. Healing begins when you stop running from yourself. Face your inner world with courage, not fear. A profound threshold in your emotional evolution is reached the moment you realize that authentic happiness is entirely unattainable as long as you continue to escape your own inner landscape. A vast majority of individuals spend their entire lives executing a frantic subconscious evasion of their own thoughts. They intentionally drown their awareness in endless digital noise, constant career busyness, superficial social interactions, compulsive habits, and perpetual overthinking. They keep their schedules packed not out of an authentic passion for their activities, but because the sudden arrival of absolute silence forces them to confront the unhealed wounds, suppressed anxieties, and buried truths they have spent decades trying to ignore. The psychological reality is unyielding. You cannot repair an internal fracture you consistently refuse to acknowledge. You cannot evolve past a pattern you actively avoid evaluating. You cannot transform raw emotional pain if your default strategy is to outrun it. Genuine recovery initiates the precise second you choose to stop escaping your inner world. This evasion takes many forms. Some submerge themselves in intellectual overthinking to avoid dropping into their heart. Others wear a permanent mask of anger to avoid confronting deep sadness. Many leap compulsively from one distraction to another because being alone with their consciousness terrifies them. Every single act of avoidance is an exit strategy that ultimately keeps you paralyzed in suffering. Buddhism clarifies that clean emotional pain is never your actual enemy. Your underlying fear of that pain is what truly paralyzes you. When you are terrified to feel, terrified to introspect, and terrified to sit quietly with internal discomfort, that manufactured fear expands until it dwarfs the original wound. Escaping your inner world is exactly like attempting to outrun your own shadow. The further you run, the more relentlessly it follows you. But the moment you drop your defenses, take a deep breath, and turn around to look directly at it, the illusion dissolves and the shadow shrinks. Facing your inner world requires immense vulnerability, radical self-honesty, and unyielding patience. It means intentionally pulling back the curtain on the parts of yourself that are hurting, the deep insecurities you mask with humor, the profound exhaustion you cover up with hyperproductivity, the loneliness you attempt to cure with unhealthy relationships, and the deep-seated fears you hide behind artificial confidence. When you cultivate the courage to sit quietly with your raw emotions, you will make an extraordinary discovery. They are not the catastrophic monsters your anxiety projected them to be. They are merely unexamined aspects of your psyche screaming for your own attention, validation, and compassionate understanding. 10. True happiness emerges when you stop demanding life to be easy. Strength is built in the space between pain and understanding. An exceptionally difficult yet profoundly liberating truth to integrate into your consciousness is this: life was never structurally engineered to be easy. Despite this unalterable reality, most human beings spend their finite lifespan aggressively demanding absolute ease, perpetual comfort, completely smooth trajectories, rapid advancements, and an existence entirely devoid of friction. The moment an unexpected obstacle materializes, they fall into panic, interpret the challenge as a personal punishment, or look around with bitterness at others who appear to be navigating life effortlessly. But true spiritual maturity recognizes that a life devoid of friction is a life devoid of growth. Meaning is synthesized not during periods of absolute comfort, but within the crucibles that test your character, expand your awareness, and force you to unearth latent resilience. Authentic contentment is never the complete absence of adversity. It is the capacity to remain structurally grounded, internally wise, and emotionally balanced while navigating adversity. The moment you abandon the childish expectation that life owes you a path of least resistance, an immediate shift occurs. You stop fighting unalterable facts. You stop viewing natural challenges as systemic failures or indications of your unworthiness. You begin to understand that obstacles are an intrinsic element of the cosmic architecture. Every pain houses an insight. Every frustrating delay refines your patience. Every emotional heartbreak expands your capacity for compassion. and every professional setback sharpens your strategic resolve. Immense psychological suffering is generated whenever your ego demands that reality conform to an idealized, friction-free fantasy. You expect human beings to behave flawlessly, but they will inevitably disappoint you. You expect major achievements to materialize without corresponding failures, but they won't. You expect deep emotional recovery to unfold overnight, but it requires meticulous time. When you insist that life match your rigid mental templates, you lock yourself into a state of perpetual frustration. But when you accept adversity as an unyielding feature of the human condition, your internal posture relaxes completely. This philosophical shift doesn't cause raw human pain to magically vanish. It simply strips away the artificial layers of resentment, self-pity, and despair that render that pain impossibly heavy. True strength is never loud, aggressive, or rigid. It is the quiet, flexible, and unyielding resilience of bamboo that bends seamlessly during a massive storm rather than snapping under the pressure. This durable internal posture is forged exclusively within the conscious space between raw pain and philosophical understanding. When you refuse to run from discomfort and instead ask, "What capacity is this specific challenge forcing me to develop?" you step out of the victim archetype and step completely into your own power. 11. You become truly happy when you let life flow. Control creates tension. Flow creates freedom. A massive percentage of human anxiety is generated by our relentless, exhausting attempts to force the universe to comply with our personal schedules. We micromanage outcomes, demand absolute predictability from inherently volatile systems, and attempt to script the behaviors of the people around us, equating absolute control with safety. But Buddhism exposes this strategy as a massive psychological trap. The more aggressively you attempt to force reality to match your desires, the more friction you experience. The tighter you cling to rigid projections, the more paralyzed you become when variables inevitably shift. True internal stability is never achieved by constructing artificial dams to block the river of life. It is achieved by learning how to swim masterfully within its current. Every single instance of psychological stress is rooted in internal rigidity. You experience acute anxiety when your meticulous plans are disrupted. You experience bitter resentment when people fail to match your silent expectations. You experience deep panic when the future refuses to present immediate, clear answers. This internal stiffness converts the natural, neutral movements of the universe into an agonizing personal assault. But the universe is not actively targeting your happiness. It is simply operating in accordance with its own ancient rhythm. Same way seasons shift, tides turn, and stars evolve. Nothing in nature holds its breath, everything flows. Aligning yourself with this cosmic flow is not an endorsement of passive fatalistic laziness, nor does it mean allowing yourself to be violently tossed around by external events. It means developing a sharp, pragmatic understanding of the exact boundary between variables within your direct jurisdiction and those completely outside of it. You possess absolute authority over your actions, your internal interpretations, your personal boundaries, and your output of effort. But you possess zero authority over global events, the passage of time, or how other minds process reality. Flow is the ultimate optimization of your energy, allowing you to stop fighting unwinnable battles and focus entirely on your direct sphere of influence. When you intentionally abandon the desire to micromanage the universe, you instantly liberate massive reservoirs of psychological energy that were previously consumed by worry. You begin to notice that forcing outcomes almost always creates structural damage. It locks you into toxic dynamics you should have exited, blinds you to brilliant alternative paths, and keeps you desperately clinging to identities and spaces you have fundamentally outgrown. Flow expands your possibilities by replacing internal panic with spacious, strategic curiosity, allowing you to navigate uncertainty with a steady heart and an unshakable inner grace. 12. Joy becomes unshakable when you build it from within, not from achievements, approval, or external success. One of the most defining milestones in your personal evolution is the realization that authentic, durable joy is a landscape you must construct entirely within your own consciousness. A majority of individuals attempt to build their house of happiness on top of highly volatile, External terrans are spending their self-worth on professional accolades, public praise, romantic validation, material accumulation, and absolute financial predictability. They operate under the illusion that once they secure the next title, the next asset, or the perfect relationship, they will finally unlock permanent peace. But anything anchored outside of yourself will inevitably disintegrate the moment external variables fluctuate, market dynamics shift, or time executes its unyielding march forward. This explains the profound internal emptiness that frequently haunts highly successful individuals who have achieved every material objective. They treated contentment as an external destination, chasing milestone relentlessly, only to discover that the finish line shifts the moment they approach it. External accolades can provide temporary spikes of dopamine, but they are structurally incapable of nourishing your soul, repairing internal trauma, or anchoring your emotions during a crisis. When your joy is outsourced to the external world, you essentially grant your environment absolute permission to dictate your stability. Unshakable joy requires discovering the unyielding baseline of awareness that exists beneath your changing social roles, professional titles, and material assets. It demands that you completely exit the exhausting comparison loop that poisons modern consciousness, recognizing that your path is entirely distinct and cannot be measured using someone else's metrics. It is constructed through uncompromising self-respect, honoring your core values, defending your personal boundaries, and refusing to compromise your truth simply to secure fleeting public validation. When you align your daily actions with your internal truth, your mind clears completely and joy becomes your default state. This internal foundation transforms your relationship with adversity. You still experience raw human pain, disappointment, and grief, but you are no longer destroyed by them. You integrate a deep understanding that external storms are merely temporary weather patterns passing through your vast consciousness, allowing you to navigate the volatile peaks and valleys of life with an unshakable internal serenity. 13. You become truly unbreakable when you stop searching for happiness outside and start cultivating inner stillness. There arrives a critical juncture in your journey when you realize that hunting for fulfillment in the external world is exactly like trying to capture your reflection in a shattered mirror. No matter how meticulously you arrange the pieces, the image will always feel fundamentally fractured. We spend years running after external coordinates we believe will cure our internal restlessness. Societal approval, romantic partnerships, constant novelty, material possessions, and absolute comfort. Yet even when we secure them, a quiet, lingering emptiness remains. This occurs because we are attempting to treat an internal void using external materials. True psychological resilience is forged exclusively through the cultivation of profound internal stillness. Inner stillness is the capacity to remain completely centered within your own being regardless of how violently the external environment rages. It is the ability to observe the traffic of your mind without becoming hijacked by it, to sit with intense emotional waves without allowing them to dictate your actions, and to meet raw experiences without demanding that they instantly change. Modern culture is deeply terrified of this stillness because absolute silence functions as an unyielding mirror, completely exposing the unhealed trauma, suppressed anxieties, and uncomfortable truths we have spent lifetimes trying to avoid through hyperactivity. However, this silence is never your enemy. It is the exact portal through which authentic peace is realized. Stillness gathers your scattered consciousness back from past regrets and future anxieties, anchoring it firmly in the present moment, the only space where reality can be effectively managed. It insulates your mind from the relentless, deafening noise of societal conditioning, allowing you to clearly hear your own authentic voice, define your true values, and establish non-negotiable boundaries. From this foundation of internal quiet, your entire relationship with life transforms. You stop impulsively reacting out of automated fear or insecurity, and instead learn to execute conscious, measured responses. You recognize that much of your daily suffering was never generated by factual reality, but by the elaborate, anxious narratives your mind manufactured around reality. This insight provides absolute emotional independence, ensuring that your self-worth is no longer up for negotiation or dependent on the validation of a volatile world. You become structurally unbreakable, moving through existence with a calm mind, an open heart, and an unshakable inner power. 14. Peace comes when you stop forcing healing. Growth happens naturally when you learn to sit with yourself. An incredibly vital yet frequently disregarded truth within the landscape of personal recovery is that emotional healing can never be aggressively forced or hurried. We live in a society addicted to rapid optimizations, prompt resolutions, and immediate answers, leading us to demand instant relief from psychological pain the moment it materializes. We want to execute a linear checklist and wake up completely devoid of sadness, entirely insulated from anxiety, and totally stripped of historical emotional scars. But the human psyche does not comply with industrial timelines. Recovery is a delicate, non-linear softening, a gradual unraveling of defense mechanisms, and a gentle reclamation of the abandoned aspects of your identity. Serenity takes root the exact moment you abandon your frantic attempts to force your own recovery, and instead learn to sit quietly, kindly, and non-judgmentally with your current emotional reality. Most individuals inadvertently amplify their suffering by waging a secondary internal war against their primary pain. They castigate themselves for feeling depressed, experience shame over their anxiety, and execute harsh self-judgments because their healing trajectory doesn't match an artificial timeline. This internal friction converts clean emotional pain into prolonged psychological torment. Authentic recovery demands absolute radical honesty. It requires you to meet yourself exactly where you are standing today, rather than where you wish you were. It means evaluating your intense emotions, not as catastrophic defects or indicators of failure, but as profoundly intelligent messengers from your subconscious showing you exactly where your boundaries were violated, where your spirit is exhausted, or where your soul is starved for authentic care. This process demands immense patience, structural gentleness, and unconditional self-compassion. You must accept that unlearning defensive habits developed over decades requires deliberate time, and that real progress often manifests as breaking down completely before integration occurs. Healing is fundamentally cyclical. Rather than linear, you will experience weeks of profound clarity followed by sudden drops into raw historical pain. This fluctuation is not an indication of failure. It is merely your psyche accessing a deeper layer of unexamined trauma that was previously unready to be processed. The moment you drop the rigid timelines and stop expecting external factors to rescue you, you reclaim your absolute authority, allowing your heart to recover at its own beautifully organic pace. 15. The mind becomes calm when you stop believing every thought. Freedom begins when you learn to observe, not absorb. The absolute genesis of human psychological freedom is the realization that you are under zero structural obligation to validate or believe the thoughts manufactured by your brain. Most individuals navigate their days entirely enslaved by their internal dialogue, immediately absorbing, reacting to, and validating the thousands of automated cognitive impulses passing through their consciousness each day. They permit fleeting mental static to dictate their self-esteem, fuel their anxieties, and color their entire worldview. But Buddhism reveals that the mind functions exactly like the vast infinite sky. While your passing thoughts are merely transient cloud formations, temporary phenomena that materialize, shift, and inevitably dissolve. They are not permanent structures, they are not objective facts, and they are never your ultimate truth. Liberation initializes the precise second you transition from blindly absorbing your thoughts to objectively observing them from a position of conscious distance. Left unmonitored, your mind will routinely invent elaborate catastrophes, amplify minor frictions into systemic crises, and resurrect historical betrayals to repoison your current reality. When you internalize every narrative your brain constructs, you become an absolute prisoner of an internal simulation. But when you establish a healthy psychological perimeter and evaluate your thoughts as neutral mental events rather than absolute commands, you unlock an unshakable internal clarity. You develop the capacity to witness a thought materialize from fear, insecurity, or old habit. And instead of identifying with it, you simply say, "I see you, but I do not believe you." You recognize that your mind often confuses familiarity with absolute truth, automatically repeating old negative feedback loops simply because they are deeply grooved into your neurology. Observation completely cuts off the supply of attention and emotional reaction that these destructive thoughts require to survive, causing them to naturally starve and dissolve back into nothingness. This practice creates a beautiful, spacious gap between your raw cognitive impulses and your actual choices, allowing you to navigate life through the lens of calm wisdom rather than panicked reflex. You stop transforming a delayed text into a narrative of complete abandonment, or a minor professional error into proof of fundamental inadequacy. You realize that the current moment is almost always entirely safe and manageable, and that your distress was almost entirely generated by your mind's internal editing of the moment. You reclaim your true identity as the vast silent space of awareness within which thoughts arise and fall, establishing a profound internal peace that no external chaos can ever compromise. As you assimilate these principles into your consciousness, a singular truth eclipses all others. Genuine contentment is never an external asset you track down and capture. It is an internal ecosystem you meticulously cultivate, fiercely protect, and ultimately embody. The vast majority of the human race spends its entire existence searching for tranquility in coordinates where tranquility cannot physically reside, desperately pursuing external compliance, validation, and comfort to cure a structural storm raging within their own minds. But true spiritual awakening reveals a beautifully liberating reality. Your consciousness is the sole author of both your suffering and your peace. Every single principle you have evaluated is an intentional gateway leading back to your own internal sovereignty. You have learned that pain is a profound teacher, rather than a punishment, that the immediate present is the only terrain where life can be authentically lived, that letting go of borrowed expectations is the ultimate act of self-preservation, and that your thoughts are merely passing weather patterns rather than absolute truths. When your internal architecture is intentionally balanced, you become completely unshakable, because the external world has suddenly become gentle or predictable, but because your mind has finally become wise, your heart has become calm, and your spirit has become invincible. You no longer desperately chase happiness across the external world, you carry it deep within your own being.